I would like to introduce items 37 and 37A, the proposed decision and alternate for proceeding 1706026. This proceeding addresses reform to the PCIA rate methodology, which allocates procurement costs to customers for power purchased on their behalf. Given the substantial interest in this proceeding, I want to begin with some background about the PCIA and then discuss the proposals. There are a lot of details that folks have acknowledged in the proposed decisions. I won't be going through all of them, but I will be explaining how I got to my position. First, allow me to thank everyone who has worked on this proceeding. This has been a complex proceeding with a lot of parties, an extensive record, and challenging issues to work through. We have had a stellar team working to analyze this case. Thank you to Judge Stephen Roscoe for his leadership, thoughtful consideration of the proceeding structure and the record, his policy proposals, and his decision production in a very shortened time. Judge Roscoe listened to all of the parties and proposed the majority of the key recommendations in both decisions. Thank you to staff in Energy Division and Legal, Suzanne Casanza, Scarlett Lang Yuo, who has moved on to ALJ Division, and Mitchell Shapson. Thanks also to the Energy Division staff who have provided thoughtful input as we work through the issues here, including Jamie Rose Gannon, Cheryl Lee, Jonathan Wardrip, and Michael Zalazzo. Thank you to Antonina Swanson and Joyce Tom, two outstanding professionals in our STAR unit who have made sure these proposals got published today. Thank you to my advisors, John Reynolds and Aaron Seibert, and President Picker's office and his advisors. And then last but certainly not least, thank you to all the parties. Everyone rolled up their sleeves and provided options for moving forward. And finally, thank you to all the members of the public and civic leaders for expressing your concerns and your interest. I've worked with many of you over the years, primarily on clean energy initiatives, and although our thinking on this issue may be different, I look forward to continue to work with you in the days and years to come. For at least the last 3 years, we've been discussing the PCIA and that it's broken and needs reform. In 2016, I led a forum to dig deeper into what are some of the issues that are happening as we move forward with customer choice. What are ways that we in a commission can help to facilitate customer choice in a way that's fair for all customers? We asked back in 2016 utilities and CCAs to come up with common consensus proposals for ways to reform this methodology. They were not able to get to that point. So in the last year, we opened this proceeding, and we focused on having a proceeding that's open and transparent, with many parties poring over thousands of documents. Transparency was the cornerstone for how we structured the proceeding. We made sure that data that hadn't been seen was available to everyone who had to make a decision. Going in, we knew this was going to be controversial. When you change the formula, costs go up for some customers and costs go down for others. That's just the way it is. And so I wanted to do a process that ultimately, whatever decision we made, we could go back and justify it based on the record. The evidence in this case has been submitted for months. Both proposals on the agenda were published nearly 2 months ago. We had an oral argument in August and an all-party meeting in September. We have delayed vote on this item for 4 weeks in order to analyze and consider comments. The revisions issued over the last week made limited substantive changes to the alternate proposed decision. We have also held multiple rate-setting deliberative meetings on these proposals, and all commissioners have had an opportunity to discuss changes to the proposed decision with the judge. It is not uncommon to have multiple revisions of a proposed decision, especially one as comprehensive and technical as the proposals before us today. However, I can understand how it can be confusing to the public, and so I did want to clarify a bit our process. Given that this matter is still on the agenda, it means we are ready to move forward. So let me now get into the substance here. First, some background on the PCIA. PCIA is short for Power Charge Indifference Adjustment. Simply put, the PCIA ensures that customers who leave traditional utilities like PG&E for community choice aggregators, or CCAs, or energy service providers do not pay more than their fair share of cost for power that was bought on their behalf. The PCIA works the other way too, ensuring that customers who stay with the utility don't have to pay all the cost for power that was bought for customers now served by a CCA. In an environment of electricity choice, the PCIA is a mechanism required by law to protect against cost shifts between customers. A couple of members of the public in your comments asked, why do we have these costs? And so let me just explain a bit further. Since most utility planning happens on a 10 and 20-year planning horizon, a utility must anticipate what their customers will demand far in the future and make investments based on that planning. Many of these costs were incurred to bring online thousands of megawatts of renewable solar and wind power in the early years of California's renewable energy program. Because these projects were financed with long-term power purchase agreements, the obligation to pay for them and the benefits they provide remain, even as customers transition to other providers. The CPUC is updating the PCIA formula now because everyone agrees it is not working as intended. As more communities form CCAs, it is important to get this right. Next year, over half of customers in PG&E's territory are forecast to be served by other providers. For Edison's territory, that number is over 30%, and for SDG&E's territory, it is also rising significantly. Before us today are two proposed decisions, Judge Roscoe's proposed decision and my alternate proposed decision. Both decisions were developed after examining an unprecedented amount of party testimony, procurement and market data, and both find that the current PCIA methodology overestimates the market value of the utilities' portfolios, thereby reducing the amount that customers pay when they leave to join a CCA or an energy service provider. To correct this, both decisions maintain the current PCIA framework, but adopt the same new benchmarks to improve the accuracy of the underlying methodology, better matching the value of the portfolio to the energy markets. The most significant changes are to update the adder for renewable energy and resource adequacy. Instead of using administratively set benchmarks based on different averages of renewable premiums to try and approximate the value of assets in the market, the revised methodology uses actual reported prices from purchases and sales by the utilities, CCAs, and energy service providers. Some parties, in particular, CCA representatives, propose alternative benchmarks based off of long-term planning values. The alternate and proposed decision both express concern that these benchmarks are not representative of the actual value being realized in the market, nor the price that CCAs or energy service providers currently pay for similar resources. In addition to the methodological changes, both proposals also include an annual readjustment or true-up to prevent long-term cost shifts and ensure that the PCIA continues to reflect market realities. These core aspects of the two decisions before us are the same, and both decisions include various options to manage departing customer rate impacts, including a cap on overall PCIA costs and prepayment options. In response to comments, the cap in the alternate decision is set to begin in 2020, and the PCIA is capped at the previous year's PCIA rate plus 0.5 cents per kilowatt hour. Beginning the cap in 2020 allows for the rate to first be stabilized and corrected. We are correcting an outdated and flawed methodology, and basing a cap on that methodology would distort the correction we're trying to make. Southern California Edison and PG&E's residential customers are unlikely to hit a similarly structured cap if it began in 2019, thus would not be receiving any additional protection by having a cap in place next year. So let me now speak to some of the differences between the proposed decision and my alternate. Where the proposed decision and my alternate primarily diverge is on the retention of utility-owned generation in the PCIA calculation and the removal of the 10-year limit on PCIA eligibility for more recent utility-owned generation and storage costs. Judge Roscoe's proposed decision keeps the existing 10-year limit and excludes legacy utility-owned generation from the PCIA for CCAs. The proposed decision keeps the 10-year limit as a policy matter to encourage the utilities to proactively manage their portfolio. The proposed decision excludes legacy utility-owned generation based on statutory interpretation, analyzing our code section 366.2F as an exclusive list of costs that can be recovered through the PCIA. I respectfully disagree with the judge's position on these issues. My alternate terminates the 10-year limit because if these costs fall to bundled customers, I think an incentive to proactively manage the portfolio is muted. My alternate retains legacy utility-owned generation in the PCIA because I do not analyze Section 366.2F as an exclusive list of costs that can be recovered through the PCIA and find that legacy UOG should be included. While these may seem like small, wonky, and technical differences, there are significant financial consequences that flow from these. There are some 8,000 megawatts of utility-owned generation affected by these differences, including resources like Diablo Canyon, large hydroelectric facilities, and some natural gas plants needed for reliability. Neither proposal before us changes the fact that these costs get covered by customers. They differ over which set of customers is responsible for these costs. I know that customers have questions regarding bill impacts under the proposals, and that some CCA and local officials have expressed concern that my alternate decision will make it more difficult for CCAs to operate and form. I think all of the commissioners have received a lot of emails and letters concerned about these issues. I've spent a lot of time in the last few weeks looking at estimated rate impacts. I think these impacts are not out of line with rate changes we have seen in recent years and lower in some cases. I've also looked closely at the data CCAs have provided to demonstrate the impact of the alternate on their procurement strategy. Their analysis suffers from some flawed assumptions, and as such, does not support the conclusions they draw. It is important to recognize that neither proposal before us increases utility profits or helps shareholders. This has been said a few times today and simply is not true. If a proposal increases costs for one set of customers, there is an offsetting decrease for another set of customers. Many of us in the room live in the Bay Area and are or will soon be served by CCAs. I understand that CCA customers, including many who are here today, have heard that the alternate will shift costs to them or increase their bills. Such concerns, of course, give me pause, and I have, again, been looking at these issues as you've raised them to our attention. However, as we look at possible bill estimates, we see that many residential CCA customers in PG&E's territory could actually see a decrease in their PCIA rate under the alternate as compared to the forecast rate for 2019 under the old formula. I also think it's important to remember that PCIA rate itself represents a relatively small portion of a customer's bill. Generation, transmission, and distribution costs comprise a much larger component of the bill in comparison and will likely have a bigger impact on bills in the years to come. As we did some analysis about what are the impacts to average residential customers, what are the bill impacts, we estimate that for CCA customers in PG&E territory, there will be a 1.68% increase relative to 2018 bills. In Edison's territory, a 2.5% increase relative to 2018 bills. And in San Diego Gas and Electric's territory, a 5.24% increase relative to 2018 bills. Indeed, the exact bill impact will depend on the utility, the customer type, when the customer left the utility, as well in particular what the CCAs do in terms of pricing and their own procurement. But I did want to provide some of these numbers to give you a sense at, we look at this in various ways. Yes, there's a range of impacts, but I think these impacts are reasonable, especially given the need to correct this formula. Factors that support recent CCA formation, including low renewable energy prices and local climate goals, still persist, and CCAs do retain the flexibility to design and modify their own program offerings. I also think it's worth noting that the majority of CCAs launched this year, even as the Commission has been considering overhaul of the PCIA over the last 2 years. This suggests they have evaluated the risk of moving forward. Both proposals before us reject the utility proposal in this case, a result consistent with the views of the CCAs. The alternate does not reflect proposals in this proceeding that would most increase the exit fee. Most importantly, I think the alternate decision ensures that all customers remain on a level playing field. So let me end by discussing what happens next. Staff and parties will work to implement the new formula in time for 2019 PCIA rates. In addition, the alternate and proposed decision both order a second phase of the proceeding to develop structures and processes and rules to govern portfolio optimization going forward, including the possibility of voluntary auction frameworks. We anticipate the use of a working group process to develop these optimization proposals further. As we move forward, all service providers must find ways to better work together and collaborate. This proceeding has made great progress by providing a more transparent approach to cost allocation, but energy providers' perspectives remain divided, and there seems to be a lack of fundamental trust between CCAs and utilities. I think you agree with at least that part of my comment. I understand the history here. I know there is history here. And this proceeding isn't going to resolve all of that history. It resolves one component of what we need to do to move forward. There are other proceedings we have, other forums to address some of the other concerns that you have raised here today. And I think by updating the PCIA, we will have the opportunity and intention to now focus on some of those other issues. There also seems to be a disconnect, and we heard that today here, from what local officials see as the CPUC's role. Our role continues to be to support a fair transition to customer choice for all customers, whether they're in a community with CCA or not. I am committed to somehow bridging this divide and our misunderstanding. I think we all ultimately have the same interest in mind. We all have an interest and responsibility to serve Californians, to provide them with safe, affordable, clean, and reliable energy, and make sure that no one gets left behind as we transition to this clean energy future. Given that, I've been disappointed by the misleading and often outright false statements I've heard regarding my alternate decision, harming low-income customers, raising utility profits, and compromising state environmental goals. These are simply false and confuse Californians. There are reasonable differences of view regarding what I have proposed, but some of the big concerns that we've heard about today, I think, result in a misinterpretation of what the alternate decision actually says and does. PCIA reform is about treating all customers equally and fair. We have to be willing to make adjustments, even if they may be disruptive, to better prevent cost shifting. Since this decision affects all utility, CCA, and direct access customers, we must stay vigilant and monitor its implementation. We've done our best to propose a reasonable mechanism, but we will continue to engage providers, communities, and customers next year to monitor the mechanism. With that, thank you for your attention, time, and hard work. I look forward to my colleagues' comments and ask for their support of the alternate proposed decision. Thank you.
Commissioners? Commissioner Randolph?
First and foremost, I want to extend my appreciation to Commissioner Peterman for taking on this task. There was wide agreement that the current PCIA methodology was not working, and we needed leadership to fix it, and I appreciate her willingness to take on that leadership. I also want to thank Judge Roscoe for his diligent work on this proceeding. He marshaled the parties to create an extensive factual record for the Commission to use in its decision-making. He made several recommendations in his proposal that are also part of the APD, as Commissioner Peterman mentioned, and that I agree with, and I appreciate his attention to detail. At the end of the day, however, the differences between the ALJ's proposal and the alternate proposed decision are ones of policy and statutory interpretation, and it is our responsibility to make those hard policy calls. And on those issues, I agree with the Commissioner's alternate. In particular, I support the APD's finding that legacy utility-owned generation is PCIA eligible and should be recovered from CCA customers as well as direct access customers. As Commissioner Peterman explained, those resources were procured on behalf of all customers, and so it is fair that all customers should pay for them. As Commissioner Peterman explained, this is a decision about which customers pay for resources that we are all using, from Diablo Canyon to hydroelectric facilities that serve all customers and provide reliability for the entire system. Bundled customers pay for these resources, direct access customers pay for these resources, and the APD correctly concludes that our statutory directive to avoid cost shifting requires CCA customers to pay for them as well. I think it's appropriate that the APD eliminates the 10-year limit on PCIA cost recovery for post-2002 utility-owned generation and storage costs. Again, these resources were procured on behalf of all customers with our authorization. I appreciate both the PD and the APD have selected the Resource Adequacy Report as the source for the resource adequacy benchmark. Because the PCIA is intended to reflect actual value in the marketplace, the RA report, which reflects market transactions, is the most appropriate benchmark. I understand that the RA true-up and the RPS true-up are going to need more factual record, and I am comfortable with filling in those details later, but I would like it to happen as soon as possible. I also appreciate that the APD puts a limit of ½ cent per kilowatt hour on how much the PCIA may increase each year, starting in 2020, and I think that balances multiple needs. The need to assign cost to the correct customer group over a reasonable time frame, the need to avoid rate shock and associated market instability, and the need for planning certainty. I also want to address the Ghg Adder that was proposed by some parties. This was a difficult part of the decision for me because I do think it's important to recognize the cost of carbon and the benefits of GHG-free resources across our decision-making frameworks. But as we've discussed in this proceeding, we're fundamentally looking at what costs bundled customers are bearing, and does the utility portfolio have value that bundled customers can recoup from the market rather than from departing customers. And so when we're looking at those values, we can't assign theoretical or anecdotal numbers, but we need to be able to identify with specificity how bundled customers would be able to realize that value. And the record in this proceeding doesn't have enough evidence upon which to make a decision about this. With the signing of SB 100, we will start to see more activity in this area of non-RPS qualified GHG-free resources, and I do believe there will eventually be additional quantifiable market value that we will be able to attribute to those resources. And I appreciate the APD's commitment to keeping an eye on this issue and expect that the assigned commissioner to this proceeding will be carefully assessing when the right time will be to tackle it. Lastly, second to lastly, I want to note the importance of phase 2 in this proceeding and trying to understand ways to reduce the IOU's portfolios and to reduce costs for all customers. And so I am hopeful that that phase of the proceeding will result in some improvements. And then finally, I want to take a moment to talk about our overall climate goals. I think I can speak on behalf of my fellow commissioners when I say that every single one of us joined this commission because we think climate change is an existential threat. And the state of California has been a leader in this area, and when we go to conferences and talk to commissioners in other states, they are in awe of the work we are doing in California and the leadership that we are showing. And so I think it's important to recognize that having a fair PCIA does not detrimentally impact our overall climate goals. All load-serving entities, IOUs and CCAs, are responsible for complying with our greenhouse gas reduction target in our integrated resource planning proceeding. All of them are required to comply with RPS. All of them will be required to comply with the new RPS goal in SB 100, and all of them will be part of our efforts to comply fully with the mandates in SB 100 to get to a carbon-free future in 2045. So I do not believe that adjusting this formula will impact the achievement of those goals. So with that, I will be supporting the alternate decision.
Thank you, and I also want to extend the gratitude for everyone being here today and being engaged in energy procurement. I want to thank Commissioner Peterman for her leadership on this issue and her long and early work to get to this point. I also want to thank Judge Roscoe for all of the work he has done to present us with these options. I think this APD reaches the balance to ensure no cost shifting between the bundled IOU customers and the departing load CCA customers. And I also want to address some of the issues that were raised by the public today and be a little redundant to what my fellow commissioners have already said. The issue of precedent, of statute, of profits, of climate goals, and transparency. And I even want to address the issue of the rebuilding from the wildfires. I'll start with the utility-owned generation. In addition to everything that my fellow commissioners have already said, I also want to reiterate that since the passage of AB 117 and the inception of the PCIA, and every reinforcing statute since then, utility-owned generation has been required. It is not something new, it is actually the precedent. SB 790 by Senator Leno, SB 350 by Kevin De Leon were two bills that I was personally involved with. And they all reaffirmed the need to capture all generation that was contracted or owned at the time the customers were utility customers. The issue of, I want to address part of the issue of the 10-year limit. There were a series of combined factors. I think it's important to know the timing of both when the PCIA was established and when all of these clean energy goals were put in place. Because ironically, the mandate of procurement of renewable resources is part of the issue that we have today, both in the sense of requiring additional procurement and in the sense of devaluing fossil utility-owned generation and other generation that did not count as renewable. So in the 10-year period that we gave the utilities, we forced them to buy more generation, and we also severely devalued the generation that they owned. Those two circumstances, along with the forecasted change, we didn't see real growth in the CCA formation until at least 5 years after the PCIA was established. In the establishment of the 10-year rule, there was really, in that time period, no forecast. It wasn't until 5 years later. So the 10-year rule, I think, is antiquated and not appropriate, given all those three circumstances. And I just can't help but reiterate that nothing in this decision increases utility profits. It's absolutely erroneous to be telling any customer in the state of California that this is a dynamic between CCA customers and IOU shareholders. It is wrong. This is a question between IOU customers and CCA customers. We already mandated that the IOUs procure this energy, and we allowed for the recovery for the utility-owned generation part of it, that they receive a profit. That's already in place. I also wanted to clarify in some of the public, I didn't hear it today, but in some of the written comment that I read, the allegation that new generation costs, new contracts, would also be covered by customers who are departing, and that's simply not the case. The most important thing from this decision, I believe, is the issue of transparency and the ability to finally true up these costs with actuals. Something that ironically the CCA proponents did not support. They wanted to utilize just a benchmark. But if we truly want transparency, we should deal with actuals. And I think this is the greatest part of this decision, is that we're actually going to be tracking what the costs were and divvying those out appropriately. I personally am assigned the ERA forecasting proceedings and the ERA actuals. I will be committed to ensuring that the true-up of these costs take place in 2019 for both the resource adequacy cost and the RPS cost adders. I would like to look at all of the different actuals that take place, and most notably, I'm very interested in the revenues that are generated in the RA market by utility-owned generation, and ensuring that those costs are in fact trued up. In addition to the true-up, as my fellow commissioners have already mentioned, there is a half-a-cent cap beginning in 2020. Together with the true-up and this cap, I do believe that the constraints will allow for greater forecasting reliability for CCA continued growth. And finally, I do want to recognize and share that I believe that the growth of CCAs can provide immense value for the customers that they serve. In addition, I think there is also direct and indirect ways that CCAs can have an even greater impact to the customers they do not serve, the bundled IOU customers, the folks who are not here today, the folks in Fresno, in Stockton, in Bakersfield, and other areas. Phase 2 of this proceeding, where the focus of strategies is going to be on reducing overall cost. This is an area where both bundled IOU customers and CCA customers can mutually benefit. In addition, I believe that CCAs can lead in cleaner solutions for local reliability, for coordination with local governments and businesses and communities, as they have shown in the fire rebuilding, which interestingly enough has nothing to do with the PCIA, but is a utilization of bundled and CCA customer public purpose programs to help subsidize the rebuilding of all electric homes in those fire destroyed areas. And that's a partnership that can continue and should actually expand. I welcome the intervention of these greater, innovative, more representative and diverse communities in our processes. And I encourage them to focus in areas where they can find mutual benefit for both IOU customers and CCA customers, like distribution costs, like transmission costs, and like reliability costs. This is an area of great value that all of us can gain from. In addition, I am truly looking forward to a heightened focus in the early part of 2019 to ensure that we can get the 2019 true-up in place at the end of the year. And I really look forward to greater innovation and partnership in the second phase of this proceeding, where we can allocate costs in an even greater and efficient manner. Thank you.
First, I want to also commend Commissioner Peterman and Judge Roscoe for their management of this very challenging and controversial proceeding. They did a very good job of scoping it broadly to engender a broad range of ideas, long-term and short-term, from the parties, but at the same time keeping us focused and structured so we would reach a timely decision, which is very, very challenging to do. I think the overarching principles were the right ones. Parties were very engaged and came forward with a lot of good ideas. I also appreciate all the comments we've gotten through email, the comments we have today, the input we've gotten from our legislative officials in the debate, which is very valuable to our process. While that engagement has been very positive, I do think it's unsettling that some of it's been portrayed as a pro-utility or anti-CCA issue. It's not. I'm not going to repeat what my colleagues just said, the reasons for that. It is about allocating costs among ratepayers, which class of consumers have to bear those costs, but it's between utilities. It's not about shareholders or utility profits. It is important to keep in mind that the legislature has expressed a strong view that local government should be able to form CCAs. It's a positive development that close to 20 are now up and running. giving them more control over their community's energy mixes and in promoting the values that many of you here today talked about. And I will continue to support CCAs as a healthy competition to the investor-owned utilities, along with other options for customer choice that will positively shape our electricity market and help us meet our climate goals. Having said that, I also will be voting for the APD. It provides necessary updates to what all parties agree is a stale and outdated methodology. It moves us closer to the statutory directive of avoiding cost shift among ratepayers. I agree with the inclusion of utility-owned assets, both pre-2002 and after 2002, without a time limit. Those costs, those generation facilities were approved by the Commission, and as Commissioner Guzman-Aceves mentioned, necessary to meet statutory mandates. They were approved as needed to serve existing customers, and the customers on behalf of whom those costs were incurred should have to pay for them. I think it's important that phase 2 of this decision will have a heightened focus on optimizing utility management of our portfolios, including consideration of shareholder responsibility for mismanagement, if in fact there is mismanagement. While supporting the APD, I do want to acknowledge the potential impacts this decision will have on CCAs. They will face changes to their overall budgets, including some beyond what they've planned for, and including after very careful deliberation by local governments. For some that are just starting up, it may impact their ability to obtain credit, at least in the short term. On the other hand, as Commissioner Peterman pointed out, the total impact of the PCA on customer bills is typically no more than 15%, and for many customers, the resulting bill impact should be relatively small. I am encouraged, as my colleagues mentioned, that the decision adds a true-up to capture the real market cost for the attributes of what's in the utilities generation portfolios, and that we establish as a goal that we will true up the resource adequacy and RPS values in 2019, and Commissioner Randolph and Commissioner Guzman-Aceves both expressed their strong support for doing that next year. In my view, the sooner we do that, the better. I support the cap that's in the APD. I would have preferred that the cap go into effect in 2019, a more gradual adjustment in the new formula to guard against rate shock, and allow the CCAs to adjust more easily. On the other hand, as Commissioner Peterman mentioned, for PG&E and Southern California Edison residential ratepayers, the cap might have not had a practical impact anyway. I also would have preferred that we made further progress in developing a metric to capture the value of GHG-free resources in the utilities portfolios, although I recognize the lack of market information that would have guided us in this effort. I hope that this will be a strong focus of the phase 2, developing a metric for GHG-free resources. In the end, this decision should hopefully provide more certainty to both bundled and departing customers, and a path forward in phase 2 for coming up with much more durable market-based solutions to fairly allocate costs among all customers, whoever their provider may be. I will also be reserving my right to file a concurrence in this matter.
Okay, thank you. I would like to first
stop and thank all of the staff who worked very hard on this. I won't call people out with a few exceptions. I will point to the hard work and leadership that Commissioner Peterman has provided in this. And I also want to thank Judge Roscoe, who's one of the very hardworking judges here at the California Public Utilities Commission. It's his task to administer all of the efforts to gather comment and evidence and to then eventually to sift it and bring it forward to us. Here he's doing that in the context of a couple other major proceedings that he's also leading in the discovery of evidence and analysis. So I appreciate the fact that he has worked with us very hard as we work through these issues. But as you can see, many of us have disagreed with him, which is our duty if for policy reasons we go a different direction, to actually articulate those reasons and to act on them. This whole effort has required a lot of hard work. It comes as a result of years of conflicting complaints from different groups, the direct access providers, the clean community aggregators, the incumbent investor-owned utilities, all have different opinions on what would make for a more sustainable power charge indifference adjustment. Everybody agrees that the one we have isn't working. So I can predict in those kinds of situations that no one will leave fully pleased. Some people will be more disgruntled than others. I note that in a policy workshop elsewhere on all the different range of customer choices, which include the CCAs, the direct access providers, the traditional utilities, the municipal utilities, the solar industry, both the bulk and the rooftop, especially the rooftop, because they represent a range of customer choices, the new burgeoning battery industry, and even the natural gas fuel advocates all have various opinions on how costs should be allocated to customers and to the providers of these services. And it's our job to try to be fair. At the same time that at various points the legislature has told us that we should help assist in market transformation. I have observed there that given all these different parties with different structures, different interests, different statutory direction, different timelines, different histories, that it's going to be very hard to make decisions that are fair to customers but please all of these different interest groups in the same way. I think that because of that, and for all the reasons that the other commissioners have stated, I do support the alternate proposed decision. I find that the inclusion of utility-owned generation is warranted. The 10-year cap should be lifted. I could not find that at this point we should adopt a greenhouse gas adder. I understand the need for the cap to reduce volatility, and I'll come back to that in a second. I appreciate some of the other issues that Judge Roscoe has raised, but Speak a little louder. Okay, but I find on balance that Commissioner Peterman has articulated the policy choices that I most support, and so I'll be supporting her decision. I will say that we did not complete every item that people brought forward, but we know that we need to move forward here, and so I'm gonna just hint at some of the other issues. One is that we're trying to deal with some of the issues related to the overall portfolio holdings of the utilities as a way to bring down costs. That will be a challenge. There's already some movement in the marketplace for the utilities to allocate, sell off, trade off some of their assets to CCAs and direct access providers. But I think that there's larger questions that we have to look at. I think that there's inherent volatility in everything that we do here that we can't wish away. Transparency, trying to adjust to actuals only will just reveal the extent to which there's natural volatility in electric markets. And so I'm sorry if people don't believe that, but it's true. I think the decision by Desert Clean Energy to step back and to hold off on establishing their efforts as a clean community aggregator, which were brought about because of changes in market price for natural gas, are a good example of some of the things that are going to be outside of all of our control that will contribute to that. So again, phase 2 will probably help further in dampening that down. Issues that we're going to, I think, are identified in the alternate are optimization of portfolios, prepayment. But I'll say that we have 100 years of history of the electric industry in California and in the United States. A lot of change has come about in the last 10 years. There are many options that people are exploring that don't have that long history, so they're harder to predict. All I can tell you is that the only thing that's common to change is more change. So I'll just point to some of the players who were disruptors, like Solar City, and they're no longer with us. The disruptors were disrupted. So I'm just cautious to everybody that there's no easy, perfect, good solutions that are going to be fast. We're all going to continue to look at this and try to adjust. So with that, I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll.
For item 37A, Commissioner Guzman Aceves.
Aye.
Commissioner Peterman.
Aye.
Commissioner Randolph.
Aye.
Commissioner Redchefing.
Aye.
President Picker.
Yes. Thank you. This item is adopted.